Hi, my name is Jim Apodaca, and I'm an OKR coach and Agile Transformation Specialist. I'm also the founder of Apodaca Consulting, where we specialize in OKRs, Agile Transformation, and Change Management. And I've been fortunate to partner with Synergita to bring you this webinar series on OKRs. For today's webinar, we'll be focusing on the OKR cycle. So let's get started. Our learning objectives for today include the OKR cycle. What is it and what can I anticipate as part of my OKR implementation? We'll take a look at the 10 implementation parameters, 10 questions that you and your team want to be aligned on prior to implementing your program. We'll take a look at an OKR roadmap and the different cycles and phases throughout that OKR roadmap. And last but not least, we'll take a look at the OKR ceremonies, key meetings that are designed to keep your team up to date and informed throughout your OKR cycle. So let's take a look at the OKR cycle. Your OKR cycle is divided into 3 different phases. You have your deployment coaching phase, your training phase, and your cycle coaching phase. During the deployment coaching phase, that occurs during month 1 of your OKR implementation. And during that time, we focus on why OKRs and why now, right? Why are we adopting this framework? What makes it crucial that we adopt the OKR framework right now? Are we responding to an opportunity in the market that we just can't miss, right? An opportunity to partner with a much larger organization and increase our footprint, right? Are we having to respond to a global pandemic and completely pivot our business model, right? Why are OKRs important to us now? And that's one of the first things that we want to establish, and we do that during that deployment coaching phase. We also focus on the change management component of OKRs, right? It's about driving awareness and going back to, again, why OKRs and why now? Why is it important to the organization? We connect it with our vision and our roadmap, right? People can join any organization that they want, but they join your organization because they connect with that vision, right? That mission. So make sure we connect our OKRs to that. And that's also done during that deployment coaching phase. The coalition of the willing. Essentially, that's about building the right team, right? Because OKRs are new and we want them to succeed, we want to build the right team. And so we typically identify those team members that are open to change, right? That are willing to embrace this type of change. And we also look for teams that are typically tightly coupled, right? Product and engineering, product and marketing and sales, right? And the reason we look for those tightly coupled teams is because we want to create those shared OKRs that we've talked about, right? So adopting a coalition of the willing is about adopting the right team and creating the right team for our OKRs to be successful, right? We also talk about communication and advocacy. Again, this goes back to why are we adopting the OKRs, right? We want to promote that advocacy for why we're doing that, and part of that is a communication strategy, right? So we talk about that as well. And then we also look at the 10 implementation parameters. These are our 10 key questions that we want to be aligned on as an organization prior to implementing our OKR program. We also take a look at training, and during that training phase, well, it's what you can expect, right? It's training, but it's focused on the OKR foundations. It's focusing on the mechanics and the application of OKRs, right? Really understanding the breadth of the OKR cycle and the best practices that go along with that. But more importantly, during that training phase, we're going through workshops where we're creating OKRs, right? Where we're becoming more and more familiar with the good definitions of OKRs, right? What makes a good objective? What makes a good key result? And we're starting to build that muscle memory as part of those workshops. And why that's important is because during the training phase, we also develop our strategic and our tactical OKRs, right? So going back to the OKR Foundations webinar, where we talked about strategic OKRs residing at that company level, right? And longer in duration, annual strategic OKRs versus those quarterly tactical OKRs that we typically execute at the line of business level, right? So during that training phase, we establish those strategic OKRs at the company level, and then we identify those quarterly tactical OKRs by working with the individual units, right? And then from training, we go into coaching. And during coaching, you can anticipate 3 different sections there. We have our set and align phase, our check-in and monitor phase, and reflect and reset. And during that set and align phase, it's really about refining the OKRs that we've been working on, right? These strategic and tactical OKRs that we've been working on as part of training. And so it's about refining those and then aligning on those, meaning that, yes, these are the OKRs that we're going to use for this upcoming OKR cycle. We've looked at the numbers, we feel good about it, right? And so we're aligned that, yes, these are the OKRs that we're going to use for that cycle. And then it's about publishing those OKRs, right, into whatever tool you're using to make sure that they're publicly available. During the check-in and monitor phase, that's where the rubber meets the road. And so this is about our weekly check-ins, right, to make sure that we're checking in to report progress on our OKRs, raise any concerns or red flags, and ask for help, right, if we are running into issues during that OKR cycle, right? So that's about the check-in and monitor phase. And then the reflect and reset phase, that is done at the end of the OKR cycle. And this is an opportunity for us to grade our OKRs. It's also an opportunity to, well, reflect and reset, right? And so reflect on the past OKR cycle. What could we do differently going forward, right? What were some of the good things? What were some of the bad things? Some of the learnings, right? That's that reflect piece. And then we want to take those learnings and take them forward into the upcoming cycle, right? And during that, we also have an opportunity to talk about keep, modify, and remove. Essentially what that is that's an opportunity for us to say, okay, of the OKRs from the current cycle, what do we want to keep? What do we want to modify, and what do we want to remove, right? And so that's part of that conversation as well, right, in terms of the OKRs that may roll over from the previous cycle and be included with the upcoming OKRs, right? And so one thing that you'll want to take note of is that cycle one, the emphasis really there is on learning, not on scale, right? However, cycle two, that's where we want to apply those learnings, and that's where we want to scale, right? Is once we've got some of those learnings under our belt. So cycle one is really about learning. Cycle two is about applying those learnings and starting to scale your program, okay? Okay, so let's take a look at the 10 implementation parameters. Essentially, the 10 implementation parameters are questions that we need to align on as an organization prior to implementing our program, right? So let's take a look at that. At what level will we be setting our OKRs? This question comes in terms of, are we going to only set our OKRs at the company level, right? Do we want to set them at the tactical level as well? Do we want to set them at the individual employee level, right? These are all questions that we need to align on in terms of it. At what different layers are we going to set our OKRs, right? How many OKRs will we set? The adage less is more is applicable when it comes to OKRs, especially if you're new to OKRs, right? So we want to make sure that we have that conversation around how many OKRs are we going to set at the strategic level, right? That company level. How many do we want to set at the tactical level? That, you know, that quarterly cadence, right? So this is all part of that conversation in terms of how many OKRs will we set. How long is an OKR cycle going to be? Your typical OKR cycle operates on a quarterly cadence, right? So 3-month cycles. But what we have seen is that some organizations have gone to a 4-month OKR cycle, right? And that's typically to support some of that end-of-year chaos that we often see, right? With just everything that's going on at the end of the year, we break up our OKRs so that we kind of avoid some of that, right? So how long is our OKR cycle going to be? I mean, you may even see that a 6-month cycle may work best for you, right? So, but that's all part of the conversation in terms of how long is our cycle, OKR cycle going to be, and how will we score our OKRs? There are 3 primary methods that you can use for scoring OKRs, and that's part of the conversation, right? What different methods are we going to use? Where are they applicable, and how are we going to apply those, right? Again, part of the conversation, how will we score our OKRs? Are metric, baseline, and milestone key results acceptable? This is important with companies that are new to OKRs because it kind of helps establish some of those guidelines, right? And what I'm getting at here is metric key results. Those are typically your aspirational key results, right? So we want to make sure we have those conversations in terms of how many aspirational key results do we want to apply to this particular cycle. Do we have any baseline metrics that we need to apply, right? And this is in the case, well, where there aren't any existing metrics. So we need to establish those baseline metrics. And then we have the conversation around milestone key results, right? These are typically those committed key results that we've talked about, right? Those can't miss key results that we just have to hit, SOC compliance or HIPAA compliance, right? Things of that nature. So we want to make sure we have that conversation around the different types of key results that we'll be using. And then we have the question around how, when, and where will we update our OKRs? What tools are we going to use, right? Are we going to use a tool like Synergy to track our OKRs, right? When do we need to update them, and what does that update cadence look like, right? Part of the conversation of where and when will we update our OKRs. OKRs and performance management, we have that conversation as well. And that's important, especially today, because you see more and more organizations turning to OKRs as a support to performance management, right? And so more and more companies are finding an interest in OKRs and performance management. And it's important that we have that conversation in terms of what does that mean exactly. And then we talk about our OKRs and our KPIs. We talk about the link between our OKRs and our KPIs, right? The stuff that we're doing as part of our OKRs, what effect does it have on our KPIs, right? And so we have that conversation there as well. And then ensuring alignment from the bottom up. That is making sure that we've worked with our teams to develop those tactical OKRs, that those teams have contributed to the key results that we have, knowing that they can only complete so much, right? Taking into account the business as usual stuff that they have to do and all the other stuff going on within their day, right? Making sure that they've had that opportunity to contribute in terms of the key results that they can commit to. And then last but not least, we talk about the critical roles for OKR implementation. These are roles like our OKR project lead and our OKR coordinator, right? Key roles that are important for the success of our program. And it's about identifying members of our team, right? That coalition of the willing who are best going to fit these roles, right? And so that's all part of that conversation in terms of critical roles for implementation. So if you're new to OKRs, this is what a typical roadmap may look like for you. During month 1 and 2, we focus on deployment coaching and training, right? That's that component where we focus on what is our strategy and understanding why OKRs is important to us and why now, right? That's also the training piece where we understand the mechanics and the foundations of OKRs, and we develop that OKR muscle by going through workshops and developing our tactical and strategic OKRs. During the first cycle, you can anticipate a number of recurring ceremonies, and I won't go into them into detail here because we'll take a look at them here in just a second. But essentially, it's reoccurring meetings that are intended to keep the organization aligned, right, and to keep a pulse on our OKRs and how they're performing. And then we look at cycle 2 here, right, and essentially that's that opportunity where we can take those learnings from our first cycle and start to apply them towards our second cycle and start to scale our program, right? So if you're new to OKRs, this is what a typical roadmap may look like for you, okay? Okay, so let's take a look at some OKR ceremonies. All right, starting with our OKR kickoff. Essentially, that is a company all hands, right? It's essentially our pep rally for our OKR program, and it's an opportunity for our CEO to get up and say, "Hey, look, this is why we're adopting OKRs, and this is why it's important to our organization. This is what it means to you, and this is how you contribute," right? And it's also that opportunity for us to showcase our OKRs, right? These are the objectives and the key results that we've been working on, and this is how we're going to measure success going forward, right? And so it's that OKR kickoff. Really, it's just kind of that pep rally for our OKR program. Okay. So let's take a look at the Monday check-in. Essentially, it's a reoccurring meeting that we do on a weekly basis, and essentially the objective of the meeting is really to review the progress of our OKRs, right? and to identify any pain points that we might be experiencing with our OKRs, any roadblocks, things of that nature. And again, we want to keep it brief. Typically it's about a 30-minute meeting, but you may need to adjust that depending on the size of your teams that are involved in that update, in that weekly check-in. A couple of best practices that you'll want to take into consideration: updates before the meeting. We'll want to make sure that our OKRs are updated prior to the meeting. So if you're using a tool like Synergy to track and monitor and update your OKRs, we'll want to make sure that we do that in advance, okay? The weekly check-in, that is not the time to be updating our OKRs. We want to make sure that we do that in advance. We also want to keep it brief, right? So we don't want to go into the weeds with our OKRs. We want to really just kind of keep it at a high level and really just communicate kind of some of the basics and the most important things about our OKRs. We have conversations around, are we on track? And if we are on track, great, right? But if we're not on track, how are we going to get on back on track? And what do you need from the team in order to get back on track, right? And by far, one of the things that is most important is that we track our confidence level, right? And we'll take a look here at this 4-score on the next slide that really tracks that confidence level and helps to understand why it's important to track our confidence level. So let's take a look at that. So the 4-square, essentially it's a dashboard created by Christina Wadke. She is well known in the OKR space, and she is known for her 4-square here. Essentially what I've done though is I've taken it and I've adapted a little bit and added to it to work with some of my clients and to paint a different picture for them, right? And so essentially what we have as part of that 4-square is we talk about our priorities for the week, right? Kind of keep it high level though. We don't go again. We're not going into the weeds here, but we've identified what our priorities are for the week. We've also talked about some of those big projects, right? It's kind of a placeholder in terms of what is coming up next week or upcoming sprints and so forth. And then we also have an opportunity to talk about any wins that we may have had, right? But the most important section here is the OKR confidence and tracking our progress. So with that, what we do is we track our confidence level throughout that OKR cycle. And the importance of doing that is identifying how confident we feel that we're going to hit our objectives and our key results, right? And by tracking it over the course of the OKR cycle, we can begin to see that pattern. Are we trending down or are we trending up, right? What is the likelihood that we are going to hit our key results if we continue to drop in confidence, right? Or in this case here, our confidence seems to be increasing, right? So we want to track that confidence level over the life of the OKR cycle. And as that confidence level starts to dip, we definitely want to call that out and address that if we need to. Part of that 4-score also, though, is the health metrics. So we want to understand what health metrics are tied to the activities that we're doing as part of our key results. And in this case here, we may have daily or monthly active users, right? Maybe we've seen a dip in our active users based on some product changes that we've been doing. Maybe we did an A/B test, right? And based on that A/B test, we've seen a decline in our active users based on some features that we introduced or something like that, right? But it's a way for us to monitor those health metrics. And when we start to see this type of thing here, we can take action on it, right? And then it also gives us a chance to talk about any learnings that we've had. And then again, we get to call out any roadblocks, right? So that's kind of a little bit about the weekly check-in and the 4-score, okay? All right, the monthly demo, really this is optional, right? But it is something that I encourage in terms of demoing the outcomes and the success that you're having with your OKR programs. If you're a Scrum organization and you typically have that demo at the end of your sprints, right? You want to incorporate the OKRs into that, right? And be able to showcase what it is that you're accomplishing and how you're getting closer and closer to your OKRs as part of that demo. But again, this is an optional meeting, and if you can incorporate your demos into your existing Agile processes and ceremonies, that's really the best way to go, okay? Monthly retrospective, again, another optional meeting. And if you're an Agile organization and you're holding reoccurring retrospectives, incorporate those OKRs into your retrospective. Incorporate those learnings into your OKRs and iterate on that. Right. Anytime you get a chance to retrospect and learn from what it is that you're doing with your OKRs, we want to incorporate that going forward. Right. So again, optional meeting, but if you're incorporating it into your existing processes, that's even better. Okay. The mid-cycle review. So this is an OKR ceremony that is unique to OKRs, right? And so really it's essentially an opportunity for us to kind of temperature check where we're at mid-cycle through our OKRs. And that meeting, it's typically around 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the number of teams that are participating. A couple of things that you'll want to note in terms of best practices. You'll want to coordinate expectations in advance, right? Make sure that you're communicating that this is what the mid-cycle review is versus what it isn't, okay? So we'll want to make sure that we have that agenda present. And really there's two key things that we're focusing on from each team. We want to talk about a big win, right? That's an OKR that we have that's on track. But then we also want to talk about the big learn. And that is an OKR that is off track, right? That may be one of those where our confidence is declining. But we want to call that out because that's an opportunity for us to identify, hey, look, are we going to recalibrate at this point and abandon any of the OKRs that may not be performing well? What are we going to do, right? But really, that's that purpose of that mid-cycle check-in is to really identify where we're at and do we need to make any changes going forward, or are we good to go there? Okay. And then the reflect and reset, that's where we get to the end of our OKR cycle, right? This is the opportunity where we get to grade our OKRs and where we get to have that conversation around, do we keep certain OKRs? Do we modify certain OKRs, right? Do we remove them entirely? And we get to talk about those learnings that we've experienced from the past OKR cycle and how do we want to apply that going forward, right? Some key things that we want to take away from our OKRs is scoring, right? So during that reflect and reset phase, we want to definitely make sure that we score our OKRs, and then we have that conversation around keep, modify, and remove. And again, we want to align on any draft OKRs that we may have, right? And incorporate those into the next cycle and start to have that conversation so that we can iterate on those for the future cycle, okay? Okay, and here we have our reflect and reset tracker. Essentially, this is a dashboard that we use at the end of our OKR cycle, right? And it calls out what our objective and our key results were. It identifies our final grade that we gave ourselves, and we call out also any learnings that we had from that particular OKR, as well as the keep, modify, and remove component of that, right? And so let's take a look at an example here. Our first key result here was to improve security posture as measured by an increase from 5% to 30% in security matrix completion rate. Our scoring methods that we gave ourselves here was we gave ourselves a 0.5 for a commit, right? And that was if we were to increase our security posture by 15%. We gave ourselves a target score of 0.7 to increase our posture by 20%. And then our stretch target was rated at a 1.0 of 30%. Well, we gave ourselves a final score of 0.3, so we missed our commit, right? But let's talk about why we missed our commit. Let's look at some of the learnings. Using OKRs as a way to measure progress has been extremely beneficial. OKRs have been helpful for us as a team to understand where we are in relation to our goal. OKRs have challenged us to become more thoughtful with the way we prioritize and with the way we approach our work. If it doesn't get us closer to our OKR goal, then is it necessary, right? So that's some of the key learnings when it came to this team's particular objective and key result, right? In terms of keep, modify, or remove, well, in this example here, we decided to modify it. And why did we decide to modify it? Well, security posture is core to our product, and we've made significant progress towards our goal of 30%. To date, we have increased our security posture from 5% to 13%, right? So short of our 15% goal of our commit over here, right? And although we missed our commit goal, we have a number of initiatives that are close to being complete. Upon completion, we should be able to be at approximately 45%, and we would like to modify this key result to reflect a stretch of 50% completion rate, right? So again, we talk about the learnings here. We talk about what our original OKRs were and where we ended up and the final score and why we gave ourselves a final score, right? So really just kind of a little bit of the OKR ceremonies there, wrapping it up with the reflect and reset tracker. Okay, so let's take a look at a learning recap. So what did we learn during this webinar? Well, we talked about deployment and cycle coaching, right? That deployment coaching phase where we talk about our strategy and we identify change management, those core components of change management, and incorporating that into our OKR program, right? We talked about the 10 implementation parameters, those 10 key questions that we need to align on as an organization, right, prior to implementing our program. And then we looked at the OKR ceremonies, including the OKR kickoff, that being that pep rally for our OKR program, right? And we wrapped it up with the reflect and reset component, that phase where we grade our OKRs. I hope you enjoyed this session. If you want to learn more about Synergita, visit synergita.com. And if you want to learn more about Apodaca Consulting, visit apodacaconsulting.com. Thank you for your time.